There are people.
Check 1, 2, 2, 2. Yes, there is. Check 2, 2, 2. Check 2, 2.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here with us at the K. Ryan Center for the Arts, this fabulous location here in the Austin community that focuses on the arts in the Chicagoland area, and particularly in the community of Austin. My name is Rashida Graham Washington. I'm the CEO and principal consultant for RGW Consulting, also the owner of what was once known as Live Cafe and Creative Space in Oak Park, Illinois, and also now currently known as Live 2.0. I was born and raised in the Austin community, and so it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all this morning on this wonderful occasion to get curious about housing and how it works and how it operates here in Austin and in the Chicagoland area. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Oak Park Bank, which is a Wintrust community bank. Dennis Jones is present with us here today, and this symposium would not be possible without the contributions and support of Dennis Jones and the Oak Park Bank, which is a Wintrust community bank. So thank you so much for that. I would also like to thank the representation of the Board of Directors for K. Ryan Center for the Arts, and we'll have plenty of other people to thank throughout the course of our time here together today, who have really worked hard to make this program come together. And so it feels a little bit weird to be welcoming all of you who are a part of the live stream this morning, because it is your community. We're a part of the same community. But I will say that I'm glad to be here with you, and I welcome you to this occasion. We are going to have a fabulous time together today. A lot of work has gone into us just thinking really intently about how housing is working and in some cases not working in our community. And so we're going to learn quite a bit about how we got here, where we are and where we're headed, and who some of the key players are who have been doing research and helping and supporting us better understanding the aspects of housing about our community today. But first, as all good things go, we should start with music. All good things start with music. And this morning is no exception to the rule. Austin is a homegrown community. I was born and raised here myself. And one thing that I know is we have a lot of honor for the people who are from the west side of Chicago. And so it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce this artist, who is also my friend, a partner in crime for many, many years around arts and education and performance. And so without further ado, I want to give you the gift that is the experience of Avery R. Young and the Deacon Board. Avery, take it away.
Come on, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. My Lord, resurrect Fred. Come on, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. Jesus, my Lord, resurrect Fred. Woman get lonely, them children get hungry. Come on, Jesus, my Lord, resurrect Fred. And when them children get lonely, and woman take over hungry. Jesus, resurrect Fred. I be one Ephraim free,
Hey, 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 one knee from free. Hey, one knee from free, my Lord. Resurrect Fred. Right here, we gonna drop. Come on, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. Jesus, my Lord, resurrect Fred. Come on, Jesus. You did it for Lazarus. But the benefit of those who don't believe me this evening. Resurrect Fred. Hey, one knee from free. Yeah, one knee from free, Lord. Hey, one knee from free, my Lord. Resurrect Fred. I'll be one knee from free. Hey, one knee from free. One knee from free, my Lord. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect Fred. Here we go. Here we go. Resurrect. Resurrect. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect. Resurrect in 1, 2, 1, 2. Resurrect Fred. Resurrect Fred. West side. West side. West side. West side.
So now you see why we start here, right? Like, you see why we have to start. We have to start with Avery. This is a housing symposium. And so I just want to take a moment to make the connection, if it doesn't feel clear and evident. Why would we have music? Why would we have arts? Why do we tie these things together? Well, like I said, Avery is from this community. Avery's from the west side of Chicago. He had to live somewhere, right? I'm from the west side of Chicago. We had to live.
Indeed.
We had to live somewhere, right? And where we lived shaped and informed who we have become. So we have to care about housing because we care about people, and we have to care about what people care about, and people care about the arts. And so, so much of what we do in the movement is driven by music. Resurrect Fred, right? Fred Hampton was about housing. And how we deliver those messages through the arts are important. Music is a critical engine to the work of social justice. And we want more artists like Avery. Avery has spent a long time. I'm going to just say a long time, brother, just a while. Right. It's been a while.
I'm trying to keep that 20.
Avery has spent decades educating young people about music, the arts, and justice, and how that all is tied together. And so it makes perfect sense that we would have Avery open us up as we introduce the K. Ryan Center for the Arts Foundation Songwriting Contest. The K. Ryan Center for the Arts Foundation, in partnership with Catalyst Schools and the K. Ryan Center for the Arts, is sponsoring a songwriting contest that builds our community and supports our artists. It's a win-win-win. We love when it comes in a trifecta that way. You can participate by writing and recording an original song that helps fill our community with hope and positive vibes. Send it in and you could win. First prize is $3,000. I might write a song.
Look, I'm ready.
I'm going to find a pen
They say they want me
here.
to be the judge, but I said,
I need a pen or something. The second prize is $1,500. Third prize is $500. And 7 runner-ups will be featured with the winners at the next symposium. 10 great prizes in all. But the real gift is the writing itself, so everybody wins as a part of this contest. Judges include music industry experts, including a music staffer from Fox TV's hit show Empire. And I think Avery will be a part of that mix as
I
well.
don't know, $3,000 I made.
You might want to get on the other side. That's right, that's right. So we're excited about this. We want an opportunity for our students to and our young people to write about that which they are passionate about. And Avery started at the same place that folks who are in this contest will start from. And where you end is kind of up to you. And so when we get to hear performances like the one we just heard, we can immediately see how all this justice work is really tied together. And so I'm going to have Avery come back and bless us two more times.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, here we go. What wondrous we. 1, 2, 3, and. So, a couple years ago, or a year ago, I was asked by an institution to respond to the murder of George Floyd and the uprising that was happening in the community that was similar to the uprisings after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I came up with the song. The wonder we are, sunrise in a Serengeti. Repeat this 7 times. Whenever blues get heavy, in every mirror be a star with a shining shape that be unique. The wonder we are. We must always see the wonder we are. The sunset toward the I-290. Oh, how beautiful it is to know you were born to stay free. The St. Peter standing on dry land was the St. Peter standing on the sea. Inside of our wonder be infinite possibility. And again, the idea, instead of writing a song about who shot who, why, Lord, why, I decided just talk to us. so that we know that in spite of and in spite of, we gotta stay magic. My brother, my sister, stay magic. When you wake up in the morning, stay magic. When you go sleep at night, stay magic. In the middle of the day, remember to stay magic. Stay magic. And remember the wonder we are. Oh, the wonder we are. Oh, remember the wonder we are. Oh, we're wonders. We're all wonders. Oh, the wonder we are. We must always see. Thank you. We got one more, and we gonna be up out of here. 1, 2, 1, 2, west side! Hey, hey, hey! This one right here. 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 It's a song written by or recorded by Parliament Funkadelic. It's like my favorite joint right here. The name of it, I'll stay. Look here. I'll stay. Though this be the west side. You know her head went out to play, but she'll get over that. Here we go. Although my reward is when she returns, keeps me hanging on. Yeah, I'll stay. Come through, Queen. Come through, Queen. We got what? The devil is a liar. The devil is a liar. Hold on, y'all. Hold on. Woo, 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 woo. Now I'm gonna talk to everybody who's under this roof and who's out there in the live street. This is the time where I want everybody to participate. I'm gonna count the band back in. Miss Kim, I'm gonna count the band back in. And when I count them in, I want everybody in here and everybody out there. You ready, Miss? I want everybody to sing "Hey" in the middle of the barn. We're gonna be West Side for real right now. West Side for real. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Soaking on her. Hey. Soaking on her. Hey, in the middle of the barn. Soaking on her. All my P's and Q's. It's hey. It's hey. It's hey. It's hey. Hey, hey, in the middle of the lawn, oh, hey, hey, yeah, in the middle, in the middle, in the middle of, hey, 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 hey. Last time, we up out here. Hey, in the middle of the bar. Hey!
Yeah!
Thank y'all, thank y'all,
Yes!
thank y'all.
Yes!
Hey.
The West Side has been properly represented. We don't know how to behave ourselves. It's 10:30 in the morning, friends. My goodness. That, friends, is how you start a symposium. So for those of you who might have joined us late, welcome. We are excited to be here. And we're going to turn our time and attention just a little bit to Amber Hentley, and she's going to share a little bit with us about our past, right? Because it's hard to know where you're headed if you don't know where you've been. And Amber has quite a bit of information that she's worked very hard in her research to bring to us about predatory lending and contract buying and the impact that these travesties have had on our community. And so I just want to name that we're not out of the woods by any stretch where these issues are concerned. There's still quite a bit of these kinds of practices that we have to be mindful of and careful about and paying attention to. But again, knowing how these behaviors have negatively impacted our communities is what will help us to be proactive about mitigating them as we forge ahead in our housing journeys together as a community. So I want to thank Amber for being here with us and thank her for her work because it is because of her work that we can be informed and take that information into how we proceed. So without further ado, let's hear from Amber. Thank you.
I just want to thank Vanessa Stokes and K-Rain Center for Arts for inviting me here to share my research with you and extend it to Austin in particular. So welcome to the conversation about the past. How did we get here? Austin originally was part of the poorly drained prairie west of the small city, Chicago. The construction in the 1840s of the Lake Street Plank Road and the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad, later the Chicago and Northwestern, whose tracks paralleled the Lake Street Road, promoted the subdivision in the 1850s of much of what is now central and southern Austin. And we're just going to pause one moment for those of you guys watching online to get everything ready for us here on the site. So the whole area became part of Cicero Township at its origination in 1857, I apologize. By the 1870s, there were embryonic settlements along Lake Street on the western border of the community, settled mainly by English and Native Americans, and on the eastern boundary, settled primarily by Irish and Scandinavian population. Small settlements also appeared about the stations on the recently constructed Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, the northern boundary of the present community. Some of the early settlers worked at the recently opened shops of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, located at to the east of Austin at Kinsey Street and Pulaski Road, pictured here. Present day, pictured here. By 1874, Austin had a population of about 1,000. The improved suburban service, the hourly trains on the Chicago and Northwestern, and the proximity of several manufacturing establishments and the railroad yards and shops stimulated the growth of these settlements during the 1880s. By 1884, Austin had a population of about 1,359, which rose to 4,051 by the end of the decade. The few manufacturing establishments in the village were destroyed by a fire in 1888 and were not rebuilt. Settlement was low in the northern and northwestern portions of the community of Austin in the 1880s. Several settlements developed along the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul tracts on the northern boundary. These settlements were occupied by Germans, Scandinavians, Irish, and Poles who lived in frame dwellings near their places of employment. The southern section of the community of Austin, south of Madison Street, was largely vacant land and farmland during the 1870s and 1880s. The great strides made in transit facilities during the 1890s contributed considerably to the growth of Austin. The Lake Street branch of the elevated lines was started in 1893, while the Garfield Park branch was completed to Cicero Avenue in 1895. Streetcar lines were extended into Austin on Madison Street and Chicago Avenue. By 1889, all of the present community of Austin was within the city limits. At that time, however, the only well-built section of the community was the central portion, bounded by Cicero Avenue, Augusta, Washington, and Austin Boulevards, which constituted the old village of Austin. So, Austin in the early 20th century. The residential growth of South Austin was largely the product of the first 3 decades of the 20th century, particularly in the 1920s. Columbus Park opened in the early 1920s, and the neighborhood around it was built up by apartment buildings, tenanted to a large extent by comparatively recent residents, Jews from Eastern Europe. After 1916, and especially during the early 1920s, the southeastern section was rapidly built up and settled by a cosmopolitan group of old Americans, Scotch, English, Irish, and Germans. Austin's real growth came during the first 3 decades of the 20th century. Its population was 7,800 by 1920. An increase of 75% during the next decade brought it to 131,114 by 1930. In 1930, the leading nationalities among the foreign stock were the Germans, Irish, English, and Swedes, with a smaller number of Italians and Russian Jews. During the decades 1900 to 1930, residential construction was so widespread that the community achieved residential maturity by 1929. However, there was still considerable vacant land, especially in the southern and northwestern parts of the community. While originally Austin had drawn settlers because it was an attractive residential suburb or because of its proximity to various railroad shops and yards, the development of rapid transit facilities via the elevated lines brought many loop workers to Austin to live. The residential property in the sections lying along the railroads, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul, to the north and the Belt Line to the east, suffered from the influx of industry and business, and these became deteriorated areas. The development of North Austin was closely connected with the building of the Division streetcar line to Austin Boulevard in 1915. With the advent of the streetcar, building activity began moving northward until amongst all of North Austin was built up. The growth reached boom proportions soon after 1920. A cosmopolitan group, but predominantly first and second generation Germans and Swedes, moved into mini brick bungalows, duplexes, and two flats. The sections of Austin given over to manufacturing during the decades 1900 to 1930 were located on the northern, eastern, and southern peripheries along the railroad tracks. Industry expanded along the eastern boundary and encroached upon the old neighboring residential areas. So during this time, restrictive covenants come into play. Restrictive covenants ran from about 1916 to 1948. Racially restrictive covenants were used to keep Chicago's neighborhoods white. In language suggested by the Chicago Real Estate Board, legally binding covenants attached to parcels of land varying in size from city block to large subdivision prohibited African Americans from using, occupying, buying, leasing, or receiving property in those areas. This map stems from one used in a lawsuit that was brought to enforce covenants. It shows that in 1947, covenants covered large parts of the city, and in combination with zones of non-residential use, almost wholly surrounded the African American residential districts of the period, cutting off corridors of extension. Many of the neighborhoods encumbered with racially restrictive covenants were subsequently settled by African Americans once the covenants had been declared unconstitutional, around 1950. In 1930, there were 132 Black residents that dropped to 60 in 1940. And by 1950, the Black population was 122 in Austin. The Black population fluctuated at this point, most likely due to restrictive covenants. So if you're not able to own in a space and you want to own, you came up here during the first Great Migration to achieve the American dream, and you're not allowed to in this space, you're going to go and try to find some place where you can own. Then comes block busting, which probably preceded restrictive covenants. So as early as 1900, when African Americans sought to move into residential areas outside of racial zones created by states, real estate agents and real estate speculators stoked further racial fears as a business strategy for acquiring and selling properties. This practice, known as block busting, was used to persuade European American homeowners to sell their property and homes short to African Americans. Real estate agents and speculators often used aggressive tactics, such as panic peddling, to urge these owners to sell their properties before it was too late and the property lost value due to the arrival of African Americans in the community. Such agents frequently hired African Americans and other minorities to walk or drive through these white neighborhoods, pretending to be home buyers or business solicitors, provoking exaggerated fears among European American homeowners about an impending neighborhood racial change. By purchasing such homes cheaply from homeowners who believed or bought into this racial fear-mongering, blockbusters sold the same properties at steep prices to African Americans who were confronted with extremely limited housing options, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. As with previous eras, racial injustice was good business for European Americans. At a time when racial segregation was legal and racial animosity amongst African Americans characterized the cultural climate of the U.S., European Americans viewed the arrival of African Americans to neighborhoods, denied to them through political and legal strategies, as a serious problem that real estate practitioners could exploit to handsome profits. In comes redlining. So the map that you see here actually tracks to present day where lending does not happen. So the larger the circle, the more money banks invested in those community areas, and I circled Austin for you. As you can see, it's few and far between, and it's definitely the smallest amount. And when I show you the redlining map, it obviously will track. You'll notice that where the smaller areas were, those areas were redlined. But redlining, the National Housing Act of 1934, which created the Federal Housing Administration in response to Great Depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s, was a direct response to the banking crises and failures of the late 1920s that resulted in a drastic fall in home loans and home ownership. To help reverse the plummeting housing market at a time of massive job losses and unemployment, foreclosures, and overall economic depression, the FHA sought to boost the market for single-family homes. The FHA employed a new chief economist whose dissertation is entitled 100 Years of Land Values in Chicago. Was ranked various races and nationalities by order of desirability. Hoyt ranked Anglo-Saxons and Northern Europeans, including English, German, Scots, Irish, and Scandinavian, all groups that I laid out for you were here in early inception of Austin, as the most desired racial stock, followed by Northern Italians, Czechs, Polish, Lithuanians, Greeks, Russian Jews of the lower class, South Italians, and these are quoted language, Negroes and Mexicans as the lowest class. It took the Fair Housing Act, part of Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974 for the government to push back on redlining as a legitimate practice. Further, the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 has also been co-opted as an enforcement tool to encourage banks to embark on fair lending practices and to increase lending to underserved areas. So you can see here these maps where green areas represented in-demand, up-and-coming neighborhoods where professional men lived. These neighborhoods were explicitly homogeneous, lacking a single foreigner or Negro. The blue areas were still desirable. These neighborhoods had reached their peak, but were thought to be stable due to their low risk of infiltration by non-white groups. Yellow was definitely declining. Most yellow areas bordered black neighborhoods. They were considered risky due to the threat of infiltration of foreign-born, Negro, or lower-grade populations, quoted language. The red was hazardous. Red areas were neighborhoods where infiltration had already occurred. These neighborhoods, almost all of them populated by black residents, were described by the HOLC as having an undesirable population and were ineligible for FHA backing. These maps would help the government decide which properties were eligible for FHA backing. Green and blue neighborhoods, which usually had majority white populations, were considered good investments. It was easy to get a loan in these areas. Yellow areas were considered risky, and red areas were ineligible for FHA backing. And I also want to be clear that these areas represented all red for black people. So even in a green area, if you were black, you would not get a mortgage. So they drew up these areas that segregated the city. But also, if you were black, you couldn't get a mortgage in a green area. If you were white, though, you could get a mortgage in a red area. And we'll talk more about that when we get to contract selling. So let's go back to Austin's history. So by 1930, considerable expansion has taken place in the industrial areas of the northern and eastern and southern boundaries of Austin. Additions to old establishments have been particularly evident, as well as the construction of a few large plants between Roosevelt Road and the Baltimore and Ohio-Chicago terminal east of Central Avenue. Austin contains a major retail center, which includes the stores on Chicago Avenue from Pine to Bernard Avenues. A second major retail center straddles the city limits in Austin. This center includes the stores on Harlem Avenue from North to Bloomingdale Avenues, and on North Avenue from Sayre Avenue, Woodbine Street to 73rd Street, and Bonnie Brae Street. The population of Austin remained relatively stable between 1930 and 1950, then declined during the 1950s. During the 1930s, the Italians moving into the community from the more crowded and deteriorated areas to the east became a more conspicuous element because of a more conspicuous element in Austin. By 1960, they had become the leading nationality among the foreign stock. Other important nationalities in 1960 were the Irish, Germans, and Poles. Since 1930, residential construction had been negligible except in the northwestern corner of the community, where it was almost continuous since 1930. Although the northern part of Austin was settled last because of its poor transportation facilities, the outward movement of industry during past decades had led to its further development almost entirely as a single-family dwelling area with some two flats. In 1960, 30% of the community's housing units were two-family structures, and 22% were in structures containing 10 or more units. Construction activity in the northern portion of the community is responsible for the 8% of 1960 units, which were in structures built since 1940. 38% of the units in the community were owner-occupied in 1960. Enters contract selling in Chicago in my research. So communities were redlined. Black folk come during, and the research here is focusing on the second Great Migration. So the first Great Migration we tracked from 1910 to about 1940, and then the second Great Migration from the South, 1940 to about 1970. So at this point, banks have been redlined for a good 6 years once people start to migrate here. And then there's also Black folk who migrated here during the first migration who may have come to Austin or other surrounding community areas and then come in and out of Austin. In our data set, there weren't many contract homes bought and sold in Austin as compared to East or West Garfield Park or North Lawndale. And you'll also notice with census data that in 1960, there were 31 Black residents on paper. By 1970, there were 41,000 Black residents in Austin, which tells us that a lot of people who moved here from other Black areas in Chicago came here most likely as a result of being sold homes on contract and being exploited in that way. So again, when you are redlined and you're not allowed to get a mortgage in your home, white people come in, white speculators, as we call them, real estate speculators, come into the communities and begin blockbusting if that's necessary. In certain instances, white flight is already happening because there's the FHA mortgages that they have access to and they can move out to the suburbs and do great things with their lives. So either they're just going for the opportunity or blockbusting, where people are intentionally scaring white folk to sell low to me because the Blacks are coming. They get these homes, these white real estate speculators come in taking full advantage of what's happening with redlining, doing the whole blockbusting thing. Racial covenants, restrictive covenants has come and went for the most part. It's on its tail end. The new strategy is to exploit the mortgage system. Because again, redlining was totally racist because a white person could get a mortgage, and it's documented in our data set that a white person did get a mortgage in a redlined area. So again, they can get the mortgages to buy these homes, so they scare European Americans who can now benefit from FHA mortgages, scare them, say, sell low to me because your property value is going to drop. As soon as Black people come into this community area, your home is instantly going to lose value, so you might as well just sell to me now. So white speculators buy for low, they get mortgaged, or they have cash on hand. It's varied within our data set. But then they go to a Black family who they know can't get a traditional mortgage for this house, and they say, hey, I have a great deal for you. I can sell you this home. They're not going to mortgage it to you, but I'll write the terms for you. And that enters contract selling. So because Black people were not allowed to access the traditional mortgage market or take advantage of the new incentives, the new federal incentives, because of these federally redlined maps, discriminatory maps, the only opportunity to achieve the American dream, to own a home, is then to buy on contract. What the contract stated was that if you missed one single payment, you forfeit all of your investment and you are instantly evicted. This is what the language of the contract said. And some folks who signed the contract knew what was going on, and some actually weren't fully aware. Because when they opted for an attorney, the speculators often said, no worries, you don't need that, I'm an attorney, because they were often attorneys themselves. A lot of them were attorneys, prominent businessmen in the loop. There were some judges in the court case. There's a court case that we got a lot of our data for related to contract selling. But these are people, men of power, men of great education, men of great access, mostly men. There were a couple women, but they were mostly men, mostly white men, who came in and just exploited the system that the federal government had set in place. So these markups for the home, so say a contract seller purchased from this white family who's about to move to the suburbs. They purchased this home for $7,000. They're gonna turn around and sell it to the black homeowner, well, would-be homeowner, for $16,000. It's an example from our data set. The largest markup we saw was 300%. There was a 300% markup. The average was 74% on these homes. So what else did this language say? The language said that the terms were 15 years. The typical mortgage given to a white family had a term length of 25 to 30 years. The interest rates were somewhat comparable to what they actually were, but when you think about the inflated price of the home, the cost of interest is much higher as well. So you have the cost of the home costing 74% more than it should, but then the interest rates, we didn't quite do that calculation, but that also is another loss, another extraction. Any repairs that were required of the home, any violations from the city about the structure or the maintenance of the home, that all fell on the contract buyer. So they had to pay all of those fines. Meanwhile, the deed remained in the contract seller's hands. Full equity remained in the contract seller's hands. Also, they were required to put down higher down payments than they would have had they been given a traditional mortgage, and their white counterparts were required to pay for their similar homes. I'm just laying out all different ways that these extractions happened. It happened with the interest rate. It happened with the cost, the markup cost of the homes. It happened with these violations that should have been on the seller of the home. And it also happened with, we had to have a secondary market insurance. We also didn't have access to insurance policies like everyone else did. So we also had wealth extracted in that way. Another thing that we want to think about is what those monthly payments would have looked like. So we know at this time, blacks did not make the same amount as whites. So a higher housing payment in and of itself is going to impact a black family in a different way than it's going to impact a white family, because they are making the income to pay the typical mortgage payment in a reasonable manner. So the black family's making less and paying more for the home, just in general because of the markup, right? But then let's calculate the terms. If you have 15-year terms versus 25 to 30-year terms, you're paying even higher because you're paying in less time. Those payments are even larger just because of that. So there's all these factors and all these ways that wealth is being extracted through the number one driver for wealth accumulation for the average American, which is home ownership, your housing stock. So, making sure I didn't. So at this time, and we'll get more, he's pictured here, he's actually not in this photo, but Jack McNamara, who was a Jesuit seminarian at the time, was in North Lawndale doing what was a semester of truth to him. And he was going door to door, just asking what's going on in North Lawndale, because they'd heard so much at the church about what North Lawndalians were dealing with. So he knocks on doors and he's like, what's the barrier? What's going on? What's going on? And it just so happens that because his father passed early, he was the head of house, so he had to pay the mortgage for his mother. So he knew what a mortgage payment should be because he was making those payments in Skokie. And the home that he was in was similar to the home that he had in Skokie. So we asked the woman, can you just show me your mortgage? And when she brought the contract to him and he realized that this wasn't a traditional mortgage and realized that she didn't realize that she wasn't paying a traditional mortgage, he was also startled by the stark difference in prices. And this was one of the main catalysts for what came out of contract selling, and how contract selling ended was through the Contract Buyers League, which was organized, and Jack McNamara was a part of that. Clyde Ross was another very public face of the Contract Buyers League. He was a contract buyer himself. He still owns his contract home in North Lawndale, still alive and well. And they began to form the Contract Buyers League to bring a suit. So they do a rent strike. They put all their money in an escrow account and just refuse to pay the contract sellers. They ask the contract sellers, will you renegotiate our contracts? We now know that this is not right. This may be legal, but this isn't right. We're paying way too much. We know you didn't pay that much for this house, and we're struggling. We're struggling. So the contract sellers say, no, figure it out, no big deal. So that is why they organized the Contract Buyers League to get this together, to do this rent strike. And if you miss one payment, remember you were evicted instantly. So what they would do is they would all come together on eviction day. Whoever, the sheriff would come out, move all the furniture out, evict them. And then the Contract Buyers League would then take all the furniture and put it right back in the house. So people would be evicted, but the Contract Buyer League just wasn't having it. There were 2 court cases. Both were lost. However, at least 50 contract buyers had, so although the 2 lawsuits ultimately failed, the contract installment payment strikes led to the eviction of 50 contract buyers. So 50 contract buyers did officially get evicted. But the struggle prompted renegotiation of 400 land sale contracts on fair terms. And I believe that's how Clyde Ross did end up purchasing his home. It also encouraged activists to push for new housing and mortgage protections and targeted reinvestment in affected Chicago neighborhoods. So our research was to quantify how much was legally but unjustly stolen from the Black community through contract selling alone. And all of these values are very conservative because we weren't able to calculate the turnover rate, because if a family was evicted, there were at least a few families that I can recall that got evicted from one contract home, but were just so dead set on being homeowners that they did it again. So they had to give another down payment and start the process again. So more was extracted because of that, because of the high turnover. And I think I might have also omitted that a contract seller could do this, get this down payment, get a couple of these high contract payments, and then they would sell the home to another speculator. So whoever the contract buyer bought the home from, using air quotes for those of you online, bought the home from, when they got the deed officially transferred, if they were able to renegotiate their terms, they probably actually had their deed transferred from someone else. So it was just like this get-rich-quick scheme that kept happening. But those are things that we weren't able to calculate. We also weren't able to calculate maintenance and repairs because, say, for instance, you fixed this home up. There were violations, you took care of it, and then you got evicted for missing a payment because that's what you were doing. You lost that as well. You lost that as well with no equity, So the loss in equity, we weren't able to calculate that either. So just understand these are very conservative estimates. So the average markup was 84%. I think I said 74 earlier, 84%. The average tax, and these numbers that you see here were adjusted for inflation for 2021. So So just for you had an understanding of what it would have felt like now, they were actually much lower back then, but just this is how it would have felt to them in 1940s through 1970s. So the average markup of a home was $77,000. The families paid on average each month an additional $628 for their mortgage. And we know that between 75 and 95, we couldn't get an exact estimate. Studies show different things. And contracts were not required to be recorded. You did not have to record a contract. So if you go to Cook County Recorder of Deeds, where we did most of our research, if a home was sold on contract, it did not have to be recorded. So over the 2 decades we studied, from the 1950 to about 1970, we approximate that between $3.4 and $4.3 billion was stolen through contract selling alone. And I always want to, I'm glad that we have this figure because we always talk about reparations. And that's why Jack and I both pursued this particular work to make these arguments. But when we talk about the calculation, it's not only conservative because there's so much data that we didn't have, but also the issue was redlining. And contract selling was one way that Black folk were exploited and extracted from. The other way was the rental market. A lot of Black people who would have purchased homes, who had good income and good credit scores, if that were the case, whatever profile you needed to purchase a home, who would have, but were faced by restrictive covenants, or redlining, who just said, it's not worth it, or heard about their counterparts being exploited through contract selling, were forced into the rental market where they also built no equity, but absolutely would have and could have if terms were equal, requirements were equal. And I wish that was the end of it. So after we have contract selling and that exploitation, we have urban renewal. And in our data set, we reviewed the court case for the Contract Buyers League. And there were interrogatories that we found from those who bought on contract or their descendants. And there's stories about how they finally were able to purchase their contract home, they were able to renegotiate, or some of them weren't, and they just paid those excessive prices. Then urban renewal comes, which is a post-World War II government initiative to revitalize blighted communities, like the ones that were hit by contract selling. The power to take over homes and businesses for public purposes and to make them new and modern housing businesses, or new modern housing and business developments. It's like, for example, the expressways that they put in. That's what it was supposed to be, but that's not what it was for Black folks. The neighborhoods, however, experienced a different kind of transformation. While whites were among those uprooted in Hyde Park on the north and west sides, urban renewal in this context too often meant Negro removal, quote. Between 1948 and 1963 alone, some 50,000 families, averaging 3.3 members, and 18,000 individuals were displaced. Old neighborhoods disappeared, and new ones faced increasing racial pressures. Although some urban renewal sites were redeveloped for institutional expansion or middle-class housing, displaced African Americans received little benefit from the program. The city tried to contain the expansion of African American living space in part by using densely packed, centrally located high-rise public housing. Segregation became public policy, as the courts acknowledged in deciding the 1966 suit brought by the CHA resident Dorothy Gautreaux. Let's take a look at the Black population in Austin. So in 1930, we're at the beginning of redlining, and we've already had restrictive covenants. So our population is about 132 here in Austin, and then it drops to 60 in 1940. I would speculate as a result of restrictive covenants and the redlining that's happening, because again, the goal was to come up here to the promised land to have opportunities that we wouldn't have had at home, when paradoxically, homeownership was actually higher in the South for Black people than it was up here because of this redlining situation. 1950, the population grows again and then dwindles. Possibly contract selling would push people out again. And as a result of these areas, again, in our data set, Austin didn't have as many contract sales as the areas that surrounded it did. So in theory, people would have come back into this area once they were exploited by contract selling. And we're still not done. I'm almost done, I promise, with the history related to housing. We have the subprime crisis. I wish it wasn't so much. Restrictive covenants, blockbusting, redlining, contract selling, and then the subprime market that hit Black communities harder than other communities. So this was, the recession started nationwide in December of 2007 and ended in 2009. By providing loans to borrowers who do not meet the credit standards for borrowers in the prime market, subprime lending can and does serve a critical role in the nation's economy, but it can be very exploitative, and that's the way that it was used during this time in Black communities. Black Americans were unequally issued loans on unfavorable terms during the subprime loan bonanza that prefigured the housing crisis and are still suffering from its aftermath. So, based on disproportionate percentage of subprime loans in low and very low income neighborhoods, which Black and brown communities tend to fall in that category because of these things that we've laid out, that was an issue. But we also saw that there was a disproportionate percentage of subprime loans held by homeowners in high-income Black neighborhoods. So subprime loans were given if people did not meet the ideal profile in terms of debt-to-income ratio credit scores. So this could have been a healthy way to do that, but that's not what it was. It ended up being predatory. The terms were very similar to contract terms, way too expensive, not realistic to be able to pay on a monthly basis. But the issue there, to tie it directly to race, is the data shows that even high-income Black folk were pushed into subprime loans. So this makes it another race-related housing issue. And when you look at the data from 2006 and 2007, in the first half of both those years, Austin had the highest count of foreclosure starts of any community, like the count number. It was like 300 and something, 2006 to 300 and something, 2007. And when you look at the actual housing stock in those years, Austin represents 3.4% of the housing stock in 2006 and 2007, but it represented 6% of those foreclosure starts because of the subprime market, or the subprime mortgage crisis. So what are the effects that are felt for generations? So you have to think, and this is to set the groundwork for these conversations that are coming about where we are now and where we're headed. It's important to know the history tells us how we get to the present, which I'm excited for that panel. But you have to then think about how has that history impacted Black association to homeownership? We know the rates are low, but what is the trauma? What is that association like? What are the opportunity costs? So we know that 3,100, so based on my calculation, with what was taken just from contract selling alone, 315,000 retirement counts could have been funded, 167 child care opportunities could have been provided, 113,000 student secondary education could have been funded, 13,115 mortgages could have been paid off, and 9,585 new businesses could have been started in the Black community. What condition does this leave the physical community in? So we didn't talk much about this, but because of those high prices for contract homes, Black folk had to then section off their homes and bring in tenants of their own, and sometimes would then exploit other Black people to make those payments. So because our people who did not choose to do that would forego maintenance of their homes to be able to afford their home. So if you're doing that, your home deteriorates and the housing stock deteriorates. I also failed to mention that during contract selling, the city stopped providing services to Black communities. Trash pickup, sewage, like they stopped. This is documented. The city stopped doing that. So if you're sectioning out your home, renting, taking a single-family home, creating a multifamily home from your single-family home, and people were working, mother and father, were working 2 and 3 jobs, right? So now there's overcrowding in the community. And there's also lack of supervision because these bills need to get paid. We want to own this home. That's why we came here. So all of these things, schools are overcrowded. And again, children are unattended. What do you expect is going to happen to the physical space around you? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. How was Black education impacted? So again, we talk about the schools being overcrowded. Let's also talk about the fact that these homes were undervalued. So even though the contract buyer was paying more, the value was still low. So what does that say for the tax base? How do we get our funding for our education? And then what are the psychological effects? I will never forget Clyde Ross saying how he wished he knew his children. Like he didn't know his children because he was always working to provide for them. And then how do children feel about that? Seeing mommy and daddy never home, knowing what they're doing, having to section things out. What are the psychological effects that last for generations? The past is not dead, it is living in us and will be alive in the future, which we are now helping to make. Thank you all, and I open for any questions. Yes. Quick claim deeds, yes. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys can hear that online, but the comment was that we need to also be researching. So quick claim deeds was not in this presentation. We need more research on that. That's similar exploitation to contract buying. I agree. Thank you. Thank you, Rosie. Any other questions or comments before I pass it on to the present? Well, thank you all for having me and listening.
Thank you so much, Amber, for what you've shared. Again, it is the thorough provision of the narrative of our past that will inform and dictate in some ways what the present and the future holds on the housing landscape. And there was a question from the floor that really tees up our next experience in the symposium about the distinctions between home ownership and home values on the south and west side of Chicago in comparison to the north side of Chicago. So Tanika Johnson has done an incredible work called the Folded Map Project, and I just want to just acknowledge the extensive amount of research and time it took to create the Folded Map experience. And we're going to share that with you right now by way of Tanika's project video on the Folded Map. And it really helps to illuminate some of and depict some of the research that Amber shared with us this morning. So without further ado, let's turn to the folded map project video.
I'm sure the words you've heard to describe Inglewood include black, dangerous, poor, gun violence. Inglewood is where I grew up and still live. Before I tell you about Folded Map, I'd like you to think about how you came to live in the neighborhood that you grew up in, or where you live now. What influenced your decision? Who did you talk to? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to tell you how I came to live in Inglewood and how I created the Folded Map Project. It all started with my grandmother, Marilyn G. Tenney. She came to Chicago from down south in 1962, on the tail end of the Great Migration. She wanted a better life, to have a professional career. And she achieved it when she came to Chicago and got a job as an administrative assistant at the local Social Security office, what black folks would call a good government job. For 7 years, she saved her money while working at the Social Security office to purchase a beautiful 2-flat brick building on 62nd and Loomis in Inglewood, the building that I would grow up in with my mom and my 2 uncles. My childhood was beautiful, unlike anything people would imagine in Inglewood. I played outside every day. I rode my bike with my friends. I met my first friends in life, one of them named Raymond. Him and I would go to the corner store every day for cookies, pickles, and chips. Even my grandmother's best friend, Miss Patterson, lived right next door. She had the same migration story. Every summer, Miss Patterson would make homemade ice cream and sell it to the kids for 25 cents. It was also on this block that I started high school. I started going to Lane Tech High School. And for those that don't know, it's a selective enrollment high school 15 miles north of Inglewood. And it's very diverse, with a student body of 4,000 students. But every day, I would have to be at the bus stop by 5:45 a.m. just to make it to school by 8 o'clock. And on that everyday commute, I would look out the window, listen to my Walkman, and notice how my neighborhood was very different from the neighborhood that my high school was in. And this was in 1993, so there was no GPS, no cell phones. If you wanted to go anywhere, you had to know the address. You had to know the streets. And so as I was on the train going to school, I would notice that my neighborhood had vacant lots. And the neighborhood that Lane Tech was in didn't have any. My neighborhood had hundreds of storefront churches, and there was none in the neighborhood my high school was in. My neighborhood had so many beauty supply stores, and I didn't see any up north. And I would always wonder, why is that? And there's also one detail that I paid extra attention to: the streets. I noticed that the streets were named the same in Inglewood and also 15 miles north in the neighborhood that my high school is in. Streets like Ashland, Paulina, Walcott, and Western. And even though those streets are named the same, they look completely different. But the real fun began once I got to school. I met kids who I felt were reflections of me, but from all over the city, from neighborhoods I had never even heard of. I had a friend named Steve Zhukevich. We had algebra class together, and we talked about hip hop every day. But his name was the first Polish name I had ever said. And then I met my first group of Latino friends from neighborhoods like Humboldt Park and Wicker Park, even back of the yards. And they were the ones that taught me the cultural difference between being Puerto Rican and Mexican. And they told me that I better not ever get it confused. Then I had my friends who were Asian, who taught me the difference between being Chinese and Korean, letting me know that all Chinese people don't speak Chinese. They speak Mandarin too. And then I met a group of friends who I thought were black like me, who lived on Chicago's north side. And then I would come to find out that they were first generation immigrants from countries like Belize, Panama, Jamaica, countries that I had never even heard of. And then there were the friends who were black like me, but from a whole nother side of the city called the West Side. I didn't even know what the West Side was, and they specifically told me it's from Cicero to Laramie and Laramie on down. And then I had my friends who were Filipino. I mistakenly thought they were Latino, and they were the ones to tell me, no, we are not. This is what we did every day for 4 years, getting to know each other's culture, each other's neighborhoods. And at this time, hip hop was thriving in Chicago, so we went to hip hop parties all over Chicago, getting to know each other's neighborhoods. And we quickly learned that the way that you truly get to know a location is through your friendships, through your relationships. And what we also realized was how segregated Chicago is. This map that you're looking at is what Chicago's segregation looks like. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in our country. And it's been that way since before my grandmother came. The blue that you see on this map, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly black. The pink, purplish that you see, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly white. And the orange that you see, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly Latino. And the neon green that you see in the center of the map and speckled throughout the top, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly Asian. And as I thought about my commute and how everything looked so different from the South Side compared to the North Side neighborhood that my high school was in, I came to realize that I was riding through Chicago's segregation. And that's when I started to understand the connection between race, geography, and Chicago's segregation. So fast forward, I graduate high school, I go to college, I fall in love, I get married and have these kids that you see here. And my then husband is also from Inglewood. So once we became newlyweds and new parents, we figured we should probably become new homeowners also. And just like me, my husband had experienced so many neighborhoods in Chicago, and we both felt like we didn't have to just live in Inglewood. We could live in any of the neighborhoods that we've enjoyed. So we started to look. And to our surprise, we couldn't afford to live in any of the neighborhoods that we had enjoyed in our teen years. So we decided we would just move back home to Inglewood. Moving back to the neighborhood that you grew up in as an adult, as a new homeowner, is very different. You start paying attention to important details like the schools that are around, the stores that are around, and if they add value to your home. One of the other things you start to pay attention to is who is your alderman? I had no clue. But when I moved back to Inglewood as an adult, I started to meet other new young homeowners. One of the first ones that I would meet is my dear friend, Aisha Butler. She invited me to community events she was starting to host, and she informed me about things like Inglewood's aldermanic issue. The map that you see here is a representation of how many aldermanic wards exist in Inglewood. All of the colors that you see within the turquoise line represents an aldermanic ward. It's 6 of them in Inglewood. There is no other neighborhood in Chicago that has this many aldermen. Aldermen have extraordinary power to influence what happens in your neighborhood. But as an early 20s homeowner, I honestly didn't know at the time. I didn't know that your alderman is your representation in Chicago City Council. They're basically like your messenger to the mayor. So if you have any issues in your community, like a broken light post, a pothole, the alderman is the person that you tell. The alderman controls things like permits, zoning, of course, repairing streets. And they also help investment in your neighborhood, or at least they're supposed to. But Inglewood didn't have one alderman. We have 6. And residents in Greater Inglewood were divided by these wards, even though we all lived in the same neighborhood. And that's when I realized that when you segregate people, no matter what way, it's easier to discriminate against them. So, to unify all Greater Inglewood residents, regardless of what ward they were from, Aisha had the bright idea to create a group of concerned residents that she would call RAGE, Resident Association of Greater Inglewood. And she invited myself and 11 other concerned Inglewood residents to become co-founders. And so what we did was start creating a gathering space for concerned residents to learn about city resources they were entitled to. And also, just to have a space where you can meet other residents who cared about the neighborhood they were living in. So we started to have meetings like what you see here, Inglewood Village Meeting. The first one that we had was in 2010. It was no more than 30 people in attendance, but today, close to 300 people come to those Inglewood Village meetings to learn about everything that they are entitled to as a resident of Chicago. So as I started participating in RAGE and growing as an older homeowner, I started to think back to that commute that I had in high school, where I noticed how my neighborhood was in despair, with vacant lots, only fast food restaurants, no cafes, barely any business corridor. And I began to understand that Chicago's segregation has a deep history. And that history was something that was exposed to me during the 2016 presidential election year, when our current president was campaigning and talked about Chicago horribly. He referred to it as a war-torn country. People started calling Chicago Chirac, and I got frustrated. I felt like it was coded language talking about black neighborhoods in Chicago, specifically Inglewood. And I wanted to change the conversation. I wanted people to not think about Chicago as just a place where gun violence occurs. I wanted them to understand the history of how neighborhoods started to struggle with those issues. And that's when I had the idea of those same streets that were in Inglewood, that existed in the neighborhood that my high school was in, that if you were to fold Chicago's map at its 0 point, which is downtown Madison, the neighborhoods that would touch each other on that map would be Inglewood and the north side neighborhoods of Edgewater, Andersonville, and Rogers Park. Two totally different looking neighborhoods. And that's when I decided to start working on the Folded Map project. Folded Map includes photos of addresses on the same street but 15 miles apart, just like my commute to high school. I photographed addresses like the one you see here, 6720 North Ashland and 6720 South Ashland. As you can see, they look very different. The sidewalks, the maintenance of the building, none of which have anything to do with gun violence, only disinvestment. Then you have 6333 North Hermitage in the north side neighborhood of Edgewater, and 6327 South Hermitage in Inglewood. As you can see, there's a vacant lot right next to the home on South Hermitage. But because Inglewood residents are so resourceful, it was repurposed into a very useful parking lot. Then you have 6129 North Walcott, 6135 South Walcott. As you can see, another vacant lot right next door to the South Walcott home. And right across the street from the South Walcott home is another selective enrollment Chicago public school called Limblin. But the students who travel to that school are having the opposite experience that I did. When they go to school, they see the vacant lots, the boarded up buildings, the storefront churches. Then 6330 North Paulina and 6329 South Paulina. North Paulina is fully flourishing, so much so that they even have an American flag on their front porch. They don't have to deal with the vacant lots and vacant homes that the residents on the South Paulina street have to. And my favorite of them all, since I was a teenager in Chicago who used public transportation, are the bus stops at 6900 North Ashland and 6900 South Ashland. Although 6900 South Ashland is a much larger intersection than 6900 North Ashland. 6900 South doesn't even have a bench for people to sit and wait for the bus, let alone a bus shelter. So in addition to photographs, I also included video footage so that people can truly be immersed in how different these neighborhoods are invested in by the city. So I'm gonna show you a video of 6900 North Ashland and 6900 South Ashland. The difference you see here and in the previous address pairs are solely due to racist housing policies and banks explicitly denying loans to Black families, making home ownership nearly impossible, all of which led to disinvestment in resources such as banks, schools, businesses, and city resources. Once I started photographing homes, of course I started meeting the people who lived inside of the homes. And one of the first people that I met is a woman named Jennifer who lived in the Northside Edgewater neighborhood. She would be the first person outside of my immediate social circle that I would explain the Project Folded Map to. And when I did, she was interested. She said that she had never thought about the fact that her address also existed on the south side. So I asked her, have you ever been to Inglewood? And she said no. Unfortunately, everything that she knows about Inglewood is what she's heard about on the news. So I invited her to meet another Inglewood resident beside me, and she agreed. Her and her husband Wade, who you see here, the Edgewater resident, would meet Inglewood resident Nanette. I knew that I was going to have to prepare for them meeting two strangers who lived in neighborhoods that would touch each other if you folded Chicago's map. I didn't want to directly just ask them about segregation. I wanted them to have a conversation. So I asked them the very same question that I asked you all in the beginning. How did you come to live in your neighborhood? I also asked them, how would you describe your neighborhood? Is everything that you need on a day-to-day basis accessible in your neighborhood? If not, what's missing? What would you like to see? Is your place of peace in your neighborhood? Why or why not? And then the big adult question, how much did your house cost, or how much do you pay for rent? I asked them these questions separately and together. This is a photograph of them sitting on each other's porches. And now I want to show you just an excerpt of all of them answering the question, how did you come to live in your neighborhood?
I decided that I wanted to be a homeowner. So I looked in Inglewood, and Inglewood was what I could afford. So I moved to Inglewood.
And how much was your home?
At that time, it was, well, why am I saying at that time? It was $61,000.
And what about you, Wade and Jennifer? How did you come to live in your neighborhood?
We wanted to live in a house. We wanted to have a green space. We looked at a number of neighborhoods in Chicago and decided we really loved the feel of Edgewater. So that's why we purchased here. Anything else?
I think I remember when we came here, there was a backyard and there was a neighbor next door, hanging out in the backyard. I think they were having like lunch with wine or something like that. And that was nice. And I like that part of the neighborhood feel.
And how much was your home when you purchased it?
$535,000.
After them meeting, I knew that this was powerful. because they started to have a conversation and would soon forget that I was even in the room. They talked about their shared interests, like beer walks, organic food and produce. They even talked about how the taxes were different in their neighborhood. So I knew that I wanted to pair another group of people together. And I would soon call these people map twins. And the next pair of map twins that I would like you to meet is John and Paula, 6400 North Hermitage residents, and Maurice, 5400 South Hermitage resident. I asked them the same questions, and now I would like for you to hear them both answering what's missing in your neighborhood.
I wouldn't mind seeing a theater, a bowling alley, maybe some type of center for the youth to kind of go hang out at, or have some things to do when they get out of school, or to be able to be exposed to different artistic options to just kind of give them something to do aside kind of like hanging outside and finding different ways or getting into trouble. Or those trouble even being an option, because if you have nothing to do, of course, it's like there's trouble waiting right over there. So
yeah, that's a good suggestion.
yeah.
I don't know. What are we?
Yeah, a lot of our needs are met here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could think of something, but yeah.
Although I did more map twins, I'm going to introduce you to one last pair, Carmen and Bridget. Bridget is the 6400 North Winchester resident, and Carmen is the 5600 South Winchester resident. I immediately started calling them the women of Winchester because soon as they met each other, they started complimenting each other on their haircuts, their jewelry, their lipstick. And so now I'm going to play for you a video of them answering the question of how they both came to live in the neighborhood that they live in.
So it's amazing how much Chicago has shifted just in the last couple of years. And when I bought my house 7 years ago, I feel like there was still, Rogers Park was still somewhat affordable in comparison to a lot of Chicago neighborhoods. So I knew I wanted something under $400,000 was what I was looking for. Yeah. I know you're like, well, hold on a second.
And Carmen, you said this building has been in your family, so can you talk about kind of the purchase history? Do you know how much it cost at the time?
No, but I believe it probably was $30,000, you know, but in '74 that was a lot of money, but 30,000, and I think it's probably worth a lot more than that now, but never know.
As you can see, some of those questions had very dramatic answers. And they're simple questions, but they get at the heart of what brings people to a neighborhood or what forces people into certain neighborhoods. And it was my goal with Folded Map to help people understand residential segregation and systemic racism. But more importantly, how do those things play out in your personal life, your everyday life? And what can you do to combat it? Folded Map is an art project that was my way of combating social injustice, to help people expand their understanding of Chicago's history of segregation. And the question I'd like for you to think about is, does Chicago's segregation truly reflect how we want to interact? Because if you think that it doesn't, then what can you do to help? One way you can help is starting to learn and have a mindset shift. And hopefully Folded Map can help you open your hearts and minds to understanding Chicago's history of segregation. Ultimately, I want Folded Map to help us heal and get to know each other so that we can tear down the racist walls that divide us. For more information, go to foldedmapproject.com. This is Tonika Johnson for the Folded Map Project.
Well, that was a fabulous journey across the landscape of our city that really illuminated the importance of neighboring and having relationship to further illuminate the ways that we need to grow and shift, but also the ways in which we are transformed by the relationships that we share. And so we're going to hear a little bit more about the Folded Map Project from Tonika Johnson, who is the social justice artist responsible for the film you just watched. In addition to having Tonika on our panel, James Borishade, who is the CEO of Circle Urban Ministries, Samantha Jordan, also known as DJ Fury, who is a hip-hop artist, Shirley Fields, a broker from Coldwell Banker Real Estate, who works here in the Austin community and beyond, and Rosie Dawson, property manager for Westside Health Authority, will be joining us on a panel together that will be moderated by Daryl Washington. So I ask that the panelists would come now to the stage and take their seats. And without any delay, I will turn things over to Daryl as the moderator. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Rashida. Man, I feel so far away. Do we got everybody here? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daryl Washington. I am the Strategic Partner Specialist for Millhouse Engineering and Construction and the moderator for our two panels today. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for that wonderful film that you put together, Tonika. So I'm actually going to start with you. And everybody do a mic check. We good?
Mic check.
Mic check. Microphone check. 1 2 1 2.
1 2. Check.
All right, there we go.
1 2.
So, Tonika, what inspired you to even make that film?
It was actually the project in itself. As you all saw, it was a thought that I've had from observations for my entire life. But what pushed me over the edge to actually get it out of my head and into the world was the 2016 presidential election year. I had called myself an artist, and I had already helped co-found Resident Association of Greater Inglewood, but I didn't really merge the two, the community engagement activism with my art, until the 2016 presidential election year. As I said in the film, I just got really upset with how my city was being portrayed internationally. I have friends in other countries who literally would just ask if I'm okay, really thinking that the gun violence is rampant all over the city all day. And I just was like, this is This is inaccurate, and we really have to help people, the larger public, understand the root of what they think is happening in Chicago, but the root of how it got that way. And we can't have a conversation about how to solve gun violence, how to heal communities without knowing the history. In order to make solutions, you have to know the problem. And so that's what pushed me to just say, okay, I'm gonna do this project now.
Well, thank you for that project. And you did do a great job with highlighting some of those issues that are here. And that's what I really want to talk to you guys about today, right? We've talked about the past. Well, it's time to talk about the present, right? So I want to hear from you guys' perspective, right? And we're going to talk about, of course, we're focused talking about Austin, but the West Side in general, at large. And if we're honest, we're talking about black communities in Chicago, because it doesn't matter if it's West Side, South Side, where we're talking about, the same issues reside in all those neighborhoods, right? So, and anybody can take this question. In your perspective, what is the current state of the housing market in our communities in Chicago, and what are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing? Say that again, Rosie.
It's in a dire state to me. We're facing, housing was already up and down for our people, right? But with this COVID kicked in, so we have to mention COVID. COVID kicked in and set us into another space of where they announced that you don't have to pay your rent, your mortgage, this, and this. So in the next 2 years or so, I do believe we're going to be right back at 2006, 2007 in the housing market because of COVID, because of the things that they did to say, don't pay your bills. I mean, to me, they just announced it too fast for people. Didn't give people a chance to, get it together themselves without giving us that thing that they always give us, the food stamp programs. You know what I mean? Back in the day, as Amber, I loved it, Amber, I loved it. Back in the day, it was pride for black people. And they take pride away by always throwing something out there free. And I'm not saying people don't deserve help. I'm not saying that at all. But when you put stuff out there, we stop doing, and we fall into the trap, not other people. So housing is, the next 2 years is going to be in a very dire state. It already is, because they're going back to the predatory lending, if you ask me, on the South Side and the West Side, because houses are now in Austin $350,000. No major difference from 2006. So people jumping right back into where we left off at.
Shirley, you got something on that?
Yes, I'd like to add to what Rosie just spoke on. There is a market out here that is detrimental to landlords and the tenants, as she spoke of, because tenants are not able to pay their rents right now, and we need to have more affordable housing, housing that's based on your income, and decent housing and healthy housing for residents that live in the Austin, the West Sides, and the South Sides of communities. It is dire for landlords because at this particular time, they are having an extremely hard time paying their mortgages because the tenants are not paying their rent. So again, as Rosie said, we're going to see a replay of what happened in 2026, 27, and 28.
All right, and I'll put a pin in it. I'm going to come back to that because I have a question for you all with that. But Latricia, would you?
I don't know. I'm kind of looking at it from a different perspective, being a lender and working in the mortgage industry for a while. The difference between 2006 and now, what's going on now as a lender, we have what's called the ability to repay. And we didn't have that back then. So looking at it from that perspective, we go through a lot of different steps to make sure people that are paying $350,000 for our property now, that it makes sense and they can't afford it. Whereas back then, it was different mortgage guidelines that, we basically, everybody got a loan. You get a loan, you get a loan, you get a loan. But it's not like that today. The guidelines are strict, and you have to qualify. You have to meet those qualifications. So it's a little bit different. So I don't think we're going to go back to exactly how it was in 2006, as long as everybody, adhere to the guidelines that are in place, so we won't go back there.
Yeah. I agree. Now, here's the question that I have. And I don't want y'all to beat me up when I ask this question, right? I run fast, so I will jump off the stage and just take off. But how do you balance the need for the affordable housing, right? That is a true need. But then also, we have to be honest and say that this is also business as well. How do you also balance the affordable housing and also make it profitable for a business? And I'm saying that from a lens that I'm starting to see that more, whereas you want to have more affordable housing there, but then at the end of the day, you can't make it profitable. You can't make the numbers make sense. So how do you balance those two?
As for me and my rental units, I have a certain amount of tenants that are being subsidized by the government, and I have a certain amount of tenants that can afford to live in the units. So that's a balance for me because my mortgage can always be paid because the government's going to pay on time.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
And I would say, whomever is going to purchase property, and you purchasing the property for investment purposes, you have to think, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So if your purpose is to make money, you want to see residual income every month, then you have to do those calculations. Nobody can tell you what you can afford. You know what you can afford. But another thing is, if you're purchasing a multi-unit property, sometimes it's not all about making money. If you're going to live in the property, you're going to live on the first floor, and let's say your tenant is going to live on the second floor, and that's going to cover a majority of your mortgage payment. You know, you may not make money until after you're done paying that mortgage. But guess what? Once your tenant pays their portion, you're still only paying $500 a month. So you're still in a better situation than you would be than renting. So I would say it's all about weighing your pros and cons, and you know what best benefits you.
Thank you. And I know James, you look like you got something you want to say.
I'm struggling, and the reason I'm struggling is because I'm trying to understand, how do we talk about housing and affordability without also marrying wages? Because in the black community, we make 30 to 50% less for the same job. And so just to live in Illinois, and I don't know about the other states, the minimum wage should be $22 an hour just to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. We're not talking about a house. And so I'm struggling with, and that's why you see me sitting here constantly, how do I discuss housing and not wages as well?
No, you're absolutely right. We do need to discuss that.
Yep.
And that's part of the symposium is about building black wealth.
Yeah.
And you can't talk about black wealth if you're not talking about wages.
About wages.
So what you got on that then?
For me, housing, in order to help us understand and deal with housing, we as a people have to deal with policy as well. Because when I hear, we want to create affordable housing, and that's one of the things Circle Urban Ministries is looking to do as well, create affordable housing. But we're a nonprofit organization. I struggle to tell a landlord who is looking to create wealth for their family to also put aside building or property that's going to just be for affordable housing as well. Because, we live in a capitalistic society, so I'm struggling with that. But for what Circle Urban Ministries is doing, we are working with houses that the government has deemed distressed. They no longer want. They want to destroy. And that's where we can come in and say, well, we can rehabilitate that property for less cost because the acquisition cost is low. So if we rehabilitate that property, we can then either sell it back or rent it at an affordable rate. But that is because we're a nonprofit organization and can afford to do so. But I struggle to tell someone who's in a for-profit situation trying to build wealth for their family, because we've been taught the housing market is how you build wealth or inheritance. How do I tell that person to cut what you're going to gross or net for the benefit of someone else?
Go ahead, Rosie.
Let me speak on the nonprofit side also. Now, 5 years ago, they were coming to us with lower properties. Like we could pick up a property for $5,000 to $10,000. But the government gets in on the real estate game also, because now the same houses on the same blocks that we were getting for $5,000 to $10,000, they now want $65,000. So they want some of the profit too. So it's sort of hard to say that I can now do the same thing you just said and keep it affordable housing or affordable sales in housing, because we redevelop homes also, West Side Health Authority,
Yeah.
being we. And if we buy a house for $65,000, then first we have to recoup the 65 because if it go in that pot, it has to come back out of another pot. But once you purchase that property, which is in distress, we still putting the same amount of money into it as we had paid $10,000. So you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
By the government jumping in on which they were not supposed to do, based on in Illinois. Now I just want to get this right. The lawsuit that was filed for predatory lending and all of that, Lisa Madigan filed at the time of us getting back these REO homes. So now the REO homes have jumped up, and I've been asking questions like, why? Why, when they were supposed to be set at a rate and given back to nonprofits to put back into the communities
Rosie,
at a lower price?
you answered it yourself. It's profitable now.
Well, I mean, I know that, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
and asking them the question. You know what I mean?
And that's the song and dance. Because you asked, are we better off than we were back then? I'm going to go against the grain, and I'm going to venture to say we're worse. Because we have the illusion that we're better off. And that's when somebody reaches in your back pocket, when you have the illusion that everything is safe. The inflation is skyrocketing, but wages are not keeping up with inflation. And then housing prices are skyrocketing. My wife and I just bought our first home together. And what we had to go through because we were black just to get this home was incredible. We had to pretend like we weren't black to get the home because of where we wanted to purchase and the cost of the house. There's no way you guys can afford this. We heard that often.
A really close friend of mine, one of my best friends, he just had the same experience with what he was trying to buy.
Yeah.
Because he was black. You know, he called me and he said that. He said, I can't say it for sure, you know, because they didn't explicitly say it, but I know this is why the deal fell apart.
Yes, and we had a pretty creative lender, and so I'm so glad she was creative. We had a pretty creative lender, and a good friend of ours who told us you need to weaponize your application. Those are his exact words: weaponize your application, and let me show you how.
But see, when you say creative lender, that's when we get into predatory lending. I'm just telling the truth about it. That's when we get into that stage because they had creative lenders in 2006 and 2007.
You know what? You're right.
So
let me change the word. We had a lender who was willing to work with us a little bit differently and sort of not highlight the fact that these are African Americans.
So
I'm sorry. As a lender, because I'm a lender, and I feel like my strengths are knowing my guidelines. So you're not going to have a reason to tell my clients no, because I'm looking at the guidelines. So I feel like as a lender, as long as we know our guidelines, you're not going to tell me if this person can qualify for this property in this area, that this person can't, regardless of what color they are.
See, the beauty of it is that it's no longer, the rejection is no longer necessarily on the lender's side.
Right.
It's on the person who's accepting the application because you have multiple offers on a home.
Not the application, the purchase contract.
The purchase contract, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
To say that I understand what you're saying from an agent's point of view, representing the buyer, we have not been able to see properties in certain communities because we didn't even get to the application part, the offer the contract. We absolutely could not get into the property.
what would they say?
Well, you know, it has to be extremely subtle. The buyers are not letting you in. The tenants, they're so busy, they can't let you in. Now, we're scheduled to see the house. We following all the guidelines. We're there on time, but we can't get in the house. I called the agent. The agent apologizes, and we just can't. And this didn't happen just once. It happens at least 4 times. At least 4 times. And I just told my clients, I don't think they want you over here.
Yeah, I've had Caucasian friends to say, well, I'm sorry, some of my African-American friends to say that they would have their Caucasian friends to go with them to look at a property to pretend like they were the buyer, just so that it'd get them a leg, you know what I'm saying? It'd get them an upper hand or be in the playing field for the property.
I read an article, and I'm sure you all probably read it a couple months ago, about a woman who was getting an appraisal, black family that's getting an appraisal in their home. And then they took all the black art, all their family pictures, and made it so that it looked like it was a white home. And
That's
I think
real.
the appraisal increased
it
by like
is.
$30,000.
I do it.
was like
I just did that last month. I had my clients to take, they lived in this really nice neighborhood. I asked them to take all the pictures off the wall. I wanted them to depersonalize. You should do that anyway. But if you're black, you really need to depersonalize your home. So I did do that. And when it comes to the appraisal, again, I was there with the appraisal, but sometimes it's not even good for me to be there with the appraisal. And I don't want them to be there because I want them to get a fair appraisal. I took comps. I gave the comps to the appraisal, and she did a good job, but I still had them personalize their home.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I want to shift gears for just a second because I want to bring Samantha into this conversation as well. And I want to hear, like, housing situation like from your lens. Like, what has been your experience?
So as a renter, I've been renting for 11 years at this point. And when I first got my first apartment, I was in Melrose Park. So it was difficult, like wages was one thing, hard to find employment. So I actually got evicted from my first apartment, which was 10 years ago. So I was there probably 7 months, fell behind, and got evicted. So the next apartment I went to, he was like, I saw your credit history. If my the person who checks this was here, you wouldn't be getting this apartment. But I'm gonna take a chance on you. And 8 years later, I'm still at one of his properties. And what's interesting is that I was in Stone Park, where there is stores galore, because you're next to Melrose Park. There's everything around. So out of convenience and trying to get closer to my daughter's school so I wouldn't have to commute, I moved to Austin. He was like, I got 2 places on the west side. You could either go to Garfield Park or you can go to Austin. And I was like, okay, I'll choose Austin.
Wise choice.
Yeah. And I'm from the west side, so it's like I knew Garfield Park. I know they're trying, to build it back up, but I already knew. I was like, I'll take what's like closest to her school. She was going to Lovett at the time, so that's in Galewood. So it just was, it was easier, it was convenient. And just to go back to when he let me rent out the apartment, I was so grateful. I was just like, thank you, because I'm young, I'm 22 with a baby. I was just very appreciative. And he was there every day at the Stone Park location. His office was right outside. So if there were any issues, I can go straight across the parking lot and say, hey, I need you to fix this. This is not right. So I got service. It was awesome. I moved to Austin almost 5 years ago. And I noticed a total change. When he came, it was only to put his hand in a slot and to pick up rental checks. I swear, the only time you would see them doing improvements is when a new tenant was coming in. So 8 years later, and over $100,000 in rent, because now I'm in my 30s, I'm calculating. I see friends getting homes, and I'm just like, right, I'm working on it. Because, at this point, I saw the level of service completely disappear. The tenants they let move in, they were not doing credit checks or even criminal background checks, because there was fighting, violence. I'm seeing all type of stuff. And I moved like right off of Chicago Avenue. I'm on Chicago and like Massasoit. So to me, it was a move of convenience, but it changed my life. It changed my view. I'm an artist, and the music I make is uplifting, empowering, and I needed to be on the west side. It was kind of a full circle thing. And you were speaking about communities, and I'm embarrassed to admit, I didn't know there was an Austin. I thought Garfield Park was just a park. I didn't know there were communities in Chicago. I just knew it was a west side and south side and up north. And I think that's something we need to work on, is really identifying these communities, so kids know, that's something that that's the beginning of trying to fight for where you live. And so once I started realizing, well, there is an Austin, then I saw that there's 100,000 of us here, and it just led to, you just started seeing why we're so divided. But all these things, it was 2020. And that was the first time I actually started withholding rent, because there was mold coming through my walls. There was, just so many things, and I had enough, because it's different when you go to work and you just really just need a place to lay your head, somewhere that's safe, nice. But at this point, now I'm stuck at home. Now all I have is Austin. So now I'm getting, excuse my language, but pissed off because everything is 20 minutes away. There's no stores. There's nothing. There's no bars to have fun. I perform all the time in Wicker Park, Logan Square, everywhere. There's nowhere I could perform, meet artists, see art, and everything. It just makes you want to fall in love with Oak Park. And then you look and see these are the same homes. Just some have been upkept, some have not. And so it's like a funhouse mirror. And I live right off of Austin Boulevard. So that's like, you see that imaginary line on Chicago. So it kind of gives me goosebumps to this day because I was supposed to be there. I was here a year ago, and that's how I met Vanessa Stokes, who put this together. She turns out to be a SSA manager for Chicago Avenue. So every question I have of why does it look like, what is going on, in just a year, I have met the people who are trying to make it better, who can help us get there. And as a renter, I'm going to encourage other renters, talk to people, find out what's going on, because the West Side is like mind your business USA. Like, don't ask questions, just keep it moving. We got this. And like people my age, I'm 33. We're not just taking we got this as enough. We're going to ask questions because we want it to be better. We're in love with this city. This city built us, made us stronger. And now there's panels out here. We're coming together, and technology is going to help us. Information is going to help us. But we have to be willing to learn, to listen. It's like, I know we're younger, but we want to teach, older people. It doesn't have to be this hard. If you have issues with scheduling, you can make it easier through technology, and we can get this information out here to where you can get a QR code, you can scan and see how to get in touch with your alderman, how to get to these events, how to get these questions answered, because the answers are always out there, but they have made it difficult for us to get these answers. But now that we know it's more affordable to own your home. I'm paying $900 a month for rent, and I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, so I could have a house for that. That's what we didn't know, and we grew up with these recessions. We grew up seeing what happened in 2008. We're terrified of owning a home, but it's like they're scaring us out of this wealth and equity. So it's like the more I'm a part of things like this, the more I see it is doable. We can do it. And we will do it. Thank you. And thank you all just for having this and just giving me the courage to come out here and learn as much as I can. I'm excited for the future.
No, thank you. Thank you. I want to point out, first of all, Samantha, look who you sitting right in between.
Oh, my God. I'm over here shaking.
You got
no, I'm like.
And you know what? I want to give you some inspiration. Like, my first apartment I was evicted out of too, and I'm a few years at the age you are now. I was a few years younger when I purchased my first multi-unit. Today I own about 8 multi-unit buildings. One of them is on Chicago Avenue in Austin. It's an event space. So we all are doing a lot to rebuild Austin.
Absolutely.
Like, you're sitting next to 2 people that's on a board where we do a lot for the community. Yes, we
absolutely
love Austin, and we would definitely love to sit and work with you. I'm Melinda. She's a realtor.
I know, and you feel that energy. You see it. We know what's going on with the violence, but we know that is not all that we are. And that's what gets me to stay here, because I could go somewhere else. It's easy to just find, well, not easy just with my record, but still, I have made it a point. This is no longer about convenience. This is about really creating community. And I've never done that. I've never been a part of that. Everywhere I've lived, everything's already been set up, and I just need a place to stay. But this is different. This is like much more intentional. So, and that's what I suggest people do. Don't just keep paying these people your money. Don't just keep handing it over, because you'll look up 10 years and just be in the same place. And you don't want that. We want to grow, and we want to thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Right. We can end the panel right now. Like, we can just leave. Thank you. Rosie, I thought you might have had something you want to say.
I did. I just want to know, did you get in touch with the landlord and explain to him that he is treating the west side of Chicago different than Stone Park?
Oh, we have the most colorful discussions. I got to the point
I like
because
that
it
you
went
put that.
from me saying I want peace, I don't want to just keep going back and forth, but it really seems like it has to be racism. Just because he's never called me the N-word, I can feel it. I can feel it when him and his nephew, and then that's another thing. I thought, this was just a big corporation. You see initials, you see LLC, and you just think, man, they got a whole team. No, it is an uncle and a nephew, and they are just a mom and pop operation. They have just they just have these buildings, and because they've been afforded these opportunities. So that is like my goal. And I have let them know you are a parasite, and you tell your nephew he's not welcome in Austin. Like, I've had these discussions because I'm 8 years older, wiser, and realize that y'all are the ones that are scared. Y'all are the ones who need us. Y'all need us, and 60% of Austin are renters, so we are out here making people rich out here. So it's like that has to stop because it weighs on you as a person, as a human being, knowing that you're just trying to survive, but they're not looking out for you. And the least you could do is get stuff updated. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be something where I can lay my head and not just look around like, oh my God, because we know the situation, but it doesn't have to be this bad.
Absolutely.
See,
Go ahead, James.
part of our downfall as a community is I'm choosing my words carefully, but I feel like we had a barbecue, so I can just be honest with us, is the inability for us to truly come together.
Say that again. Say it one more time. I don't think everybody heard you.
Part of our downfall as a community is the inability for us to truly come together. We have factions everywhere. And what I like to do is I like to travel to affluent communities and just study what's the difference. And when I go to these other affluent communities and they are together, you could not have a landlord in some of those other communities like that, and they would not last long because the entire community would weed them out. But in our communities here, everybody's vying for power. So we lose progress because everybody's vying for power. And it's the same power. And that until we can learn that, let me say this a different way. Until you don't see 6, 7 churches in the same 3-block vicinity.
That's all storefront, and it could be one.
It's real talk. We forget the liquor stores because they'll leave if we can come together. But until we stop seeing 6, 7, 8 churches in a 3-block vicinity, all fighting for power, never coming together, we can't solve these kind of issues because we need we need each other for real.
Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're out organized.
Out organized.
Absolutely. On that, I'm going to leave it right there because this conversation, we talked in the back and we said, we're just going to sit down here and we're going to talk like family, right? And the only thing we're missing was the wine. We got water this time. I'm not Jesus, I can't turn it into wine. But next time we're going to have wine, right? And we're going to continue this conversation. I think it's a very important, very critical conversation to continue. But I want to thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday. I want to thank you all for your input, for your wisdom, for your insight. This has been an amazing time, and we want to continue it on. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you.
Wow, that was really a robust experience. And as Daryl mentioned, probably that panel could have talked for 2 more hours about the really important and vital aspects of how our housing experiences are being impacted currently. We're going to take some time right now just to give just due to a force, a person who's been really monumental, I would say, in the uncovering of some of what has been going on in the housing market on the West Side for quite some time, decades for sure. And I'm going to call Amber back to the stage so that she could share in this tribute. Amber.
very grateful to have this opportunity to publicly thank Jack McNamara for the work that he did in Chicago, and particularly on the West Side, and his influence in my life. And I just want to share that this man fought till the very end. So the Contract Buyers League, if you don't know about it, if you don't know about Jack's role, and I also want to share that he always tried to minimize his role in that because he felt like that was about the contract buyers. He always, whenever I was around him and whenever we talked about it and anybody would call him the lead organizer, he would always be like, no, 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 that was Clyde or that was Ethel. He always gave the credit for that to the contract buyers themselves and for what they did. But so I encourage you, if you're not familiar, there's YouTube videos. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a wonderful article. There's a documentary, Shame of Chicago, going around. So I want you to check that out. But what I wanted to make this tribute about is the fact that he never stopped. And so that started in the 60s, 70s. And the research that we did was because of Jack McNamara. He could not let it go because the wrong was never righted. And he felt that very strongly. Injustice was his very least favorite thing of any kind. But because of something that he was personally involved with and he fought for and he felt like the right was never made there, he didn't let it go. And one day, he just decided to calculate with some students how much was stolen. And he made these simple calculations, and that's what drove the work to get to that 3.3 or 3.4 to 4.3 billion figure. That was Jack, because he didn't want to let it go. And the reason why he wanted to know what the actual calculation was is because he felt that the Black community in Chicago, and just everywhere, but his home was here, was due reparations. That was something else that he spoke about until his very last day, something else that he was very passionate about until his very last day. When we were doing the research, we started in the Cook County Recorder of Deeds in the basement. And Jack was there every day that summer. And when we hit a dead end, he said, you know what? Let's go back to the archives like we did back in the day, and let's look at those records. The archives are at 75th and Pulaski, and I believe Jack lived in Wilmette. And sometimes Jack had a car, and sometimes Jack didn't have a car. And I was a grad student who had just come to Chicago for the summer to do the research, so my car was not here. The days that Jack had a car, Jack picked me up from my sublease in Little Italy to take me to the Recorder of Deeds. I meant to the National Archives, because he was committed to the work. And the days when Jack didn't have a car, someone else picked me up, and we picked up Jack at the Orange Line at Pulaski. He would commute from Wilmette via public transportation because it meant that much to him. And at that time, he was carrying his oxygen bag. He didn't have the luxury of pulling it or rolling it. He got upgraded. But at the end of the day, he never stopped. He never stopped. And it doesn't stop there. That was the summer of 2018. I go back to Durham for grad school, and I hear from Jack just about every day about what we're going to do, because we connected at Ford City Food Court when we would take our little breaks, and we would just talk about like, oh, this is great research, but I'm not here for the research. I'm here to figure out what we're going to do about it. And Jack said the same thing, and he had this idea, restitution homes, where he would provide below market rate homes to Black folk. Basically 0% interest is what he wanted to do to recoup what they had lost generations before. So that was the first time I'd heard of his idea about restitution homes. So I move here, and he decides that we're going to do restitution homes. And we talk on the phone every day at 8:30 a.m. every weekday, sometimes on weekends if he had something exciting to report or if I did. But this happened consistently for a year. This is an 80-something-year-old man, and he did not let it go. We met with as many people as we possibly could. We met with Karen Yarborough. We met with the IAF. We met with anybody who Jack thought. We went to the Rainbow Push Coalition, trying to figure out, how do we get this off the ground? How do we right this wrong? And Jack drove that. When COVID hit, we took a little break from the daily calls, but once a week we're meeting with 2 of his contemporaries to figure out, how do we get funding to do this? How do we make this happen? He never let it go. And until the very end, he was at St. Agatha's. Working to right this wrong even then. One of the things that and I know I have 5 minutes, I probably went over already, but Jack was wonderful and I loved him so much. Till the very end, he loved Black people. That was something that was so special to me as well. This man was a white Irish man. He had so much privilege. He could have done so many things. He was brilliant, but he fought for Black people because he loved Black people. And he took a fall the last week. He took a couple of falls that week. And when I talked to him on the phone, he shared the story about how he fell outside of St. Agatha's, and they carried him up the stairs. He was being interviewed. And he was so excited, and he was so calm. And Jack is super fiery, so usually when we talk on the phone, there's a lot of fire. But the last conversation that I had with him that Friday, earlier that week, he had gone to St. Agatha's, and he told me the story about how he'd fallen earlier, and then he fell again, and they carried him up the stairs. And he said, Amber, they have said so many things about Black people this and Black people that, and they won't work, and they're this, and they're la, 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 la. And he said, no white man would have carried me up those stairs like that. No white man would have followed me all the way home from North Lawndale to Wilmette. All I know of Black people is love and kindness. There's nothing kinder. And so I just want to, again, thank Jax for his legacy. It will continue to live on because he was writing until the very end. He was thinking things up until the very end. And we'll make it happen for him. We'll make it happen for him. His work does not stop. So, thank you, Jack. Love you. We love you.
So sometimes you get asked to do work like what I'm doing right now, where you get to MC a symposium in a place where you were born and raised, and it feels really wonderful and really special to be asked to do that. It feels even more special when you hear a tribute like the one I just heard. In full transparency, I don't know Amber, but it's such a remarkable story, this life that you got to share with Jack. And I can feel your heart and the passion that you had in that relationship. So it's one thing to be on the landscape where you get to have impact on the transformation of housing. It's another thing to build relationships and make friends in that journey. So thank you for what you've shared. And now we will turn to our next panel. And on this panel, we will have Tanika Johnson come back to us from the Folded Map Project. And along with Tanika, we will also have James Harris, Vice President of Strategic Markets from Wintrust Mortgage. We will also have my friend, Athena Williams, the Executive Director of Oak Park Regional Housing Center. And then finally, last but of course not least, we have Melanie Jeffries from Millhouse Engineering. Yes. And Daryl's going to come back to us as the moderator. So take it away, Daryl.
Thank you, Rashida. And Amber, I want to say too, thank you. That was a very beautiful tribute. Thank you for that. I never had the privilege of meeting Jack, but listening to your tribute, I feel like I know him, at least a little bit. And he sounds like an amazing person. So thank you for that. Now we're getting to this panel with these good people here. Hey, y'all. How y'all doing?
Great.
Amazing.
Athena, you just over there smiling from ear to ear. I know you feeling good. So you all were able to hear the last panel, right? And we were talking about the current state of things, right? We're talking about this whole symposium is about past, present, and future. And so now we want to dig into the future in housing and how can we leverage housing to not only start to undo past injustices, but then to build black wealth. And that is the actual first question. How can we use it to leverage and build black wealth?
Amber, it would be perfect if you were up here as well. Because
You know what? Amber, come on. Get on up here.
Come on down.
Come on, Amber.
And the reason I say that is because there is such wealth of knowledge she has, being someone who has done a hard labor of the research. So it would definitely benefit all of us to be able to hear what she thinks about how we can begin to work towards healing inclusively, which means not just economically, but also reimagining new ways of what redress and reparations and healing could look like. So I've spoken to her personally about it, so I know you all would appreciate it. So that's why I had to ask for you to come over here.
I appreciate that.
So, Amber, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Because Tonika done brought you up here. We done brought you up here now. What you got? No pressure.
Speculative future, that's all.
And we're talking about reimagining.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the first part of that is fully embracing reparations and thinking about what I laid out are things that were federal policies. So each locale did messed up things in their own way, but the federal government set the groundwork for that. That's the first thing in terms of thinking big, and then also being comfortable to create policies that are truly, truly, truly pointed explicitly, just like a redlining map was, that was explicitly racist. That means that what has to counteract that, we have to get public consciousness in this capital. So I think James mentioned that. I had a question for the next panel, our last panel actually, so I'm bringing it up here. But James mentioning the capitalist system that we work in and the other structures, that's what keep us where we are. Because you're not allowed to create anti-racist policies. I actually don't like that phrase, but like you're not able to create policies for descendants of formerly enslaved Africans when things were targeted, the policies were created that were targeted explicitly for that. So the reimagining has to be about the structure and not like these little games that we play within the system and the structure, because the reimagining has to be with the structure. Because like the lending practices, the underwriting practices, all of these things, there's a structure in place. And people follow the rule of that structure. So a perfect example is, I'm grateful that they changed the lending requirements, right? Because we don't want people exploited through the subprime market, right? But then that same structure that's meant to protect those that are most vulnerable also boxes them in, because if a home here is $300,000 and the average person who lives here, thank you, James, for the income point, you make it, like, that's not reasonable to expect somebody to, under those strict requirements that are meant to protect, which I get it, but it also boxes that person out who belongs to this community. And it's not their fault. Why is their income less than the white income? And we can track policies and structures that reinforce that until, like, the reimagining has to be reimagining the systems. And, like, the status quo has to be challenged. The status quo was created for a classist, racist, well, I'll say classist, and it's just easier to put people because of the color of skin in a certain class box, but America's classist. It was founded on those principles, and so color just makes it easier for you to differentiate a class. But at the end of the day, the reimagining has to be with challenging and changing the structures. Because if we keep playing with you tighten up these requirements so we don't exploit black people, but then those same things eliminate the option for that black person to buy that $300,000 home that's in their community that probably shouldn't be that price in the first place. So I think the first thing is being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and straightforward leaders of financial institutions. I'm challenging financial institutions because that's where the money is. They're the ones who did this. They're the ones that benefited from contract selling and all these other things. They housed the money for these speculators. Change the policies to create targeted policies and let it be okay and let people challenge it. But this is for a black person. You can show that you are born and raised in Austin. You get this house for what can you afford? What is 30% of your income? Okay, well then that's a reasonable monthly payment. It's not based on the home is $300K, so what's the mortgage payment? Is that 30%? Nope. Let's work backwards. Let's work backwards for you, because that's what equity is. Because we actually targeted you and put you in this space. You don't get paid enough. There's all these other things that the government did or these structures put in place. Let's then say, all right, I'm going to start with you, black person, and what can you afford? You want that house? Okay, so then we'll figure out how we give you a down payment for $100,000. So that way we can get your mortgage to what you can reasonably afford. To also send your kids to school if that's the thing. Okay, they got to talk too long.
No. And I'll add to the fact that one of the words I like that you used the most was leadership. And I think as a developer on the stage, I think leadership and having the opportunity to decide where we're building, what we're building, why we're building it, how you connect that with community is an important piece because we've been there, we've seen it, so we put a lot more thought into why and how it's impactful and how that works and how it all works together and how we can move that needle. So I think the leadership, and when you look at the developers that's coming through your neighborhood, what does their board look like? Who is it? Because sometimes the person that's the face person is the people that are actually making the decision. So for us as a minority-owned firm that is saying, okay, let's start picking the lots and deciding, because you leave it up to the city sometimes, we're not the people that are chosen. So I think leadership is very important.
So I would like to just add to that, Daryl. I believe from my experience of what I've been involved in and from what I've seen is we need to organize people first. We need to organize our people. Then we need to educate our people about their options. Then once we organize and have people educated, then we can begin to work with partners such as Wintrust Bank. So James sitting here to my left, he's with Wintrust Bank. I believe they sponsored this event this evening. But you have to organize, you have to educate, and then you have to, sorry I have to use this word, but once you organize and educate, then you attack the systems. That's the way, it's a process. You have to organize, you have to educate. So to increase black wealth as we see things now, or to increase black wealth from the vantage point from what I would like to see in the future, I would like to see our communities to be more educated about the process. I would like to see, our communities to know that they have opportunities, that there's access for them. Because it was mentioned earlier in the previous panel how there's so many silos. If we could all become one around certain topics, then we could really become a force to be reckoned with.
Why is that so challenging?
Let me chime in if you don't mind, please.
Go ahead, Dan.
So from a lending perspective, certainly I can identify with some of the things that my colleagues on the other table and Athena has shared. We need to look at the system as it is, and there definitely need to be some changes made. Good news is there have been strides forward from an advocacy standpoint with some of our alliances with partners that do make these decisions from a lending perspective. and we are able to implement some of those things. I believe Amber mentioned something about using a hard stop at affordability. At Wintrust for us, it's not just about affordability, but it's also about sustainability. And we have a program that's very much like what she described that we've partnered with Habitat for Humanity with. And we had a hard stop at a 30% housing ratio, and then we bridged the gap of affordability for that remaining amount. And there is nothing saying that we can't replicate that same type of process with other programs, products, and services specifically geared towards our underserved market. So there's opportunity there. Athena mentioned educating. Certainly that is a big component of it because the literacy component of this is there's a shortfall there. And to fill that gap there, and then to be able to organize that and then go at the root causes of these things that we see, I think will put us in a better place than we are today. Certainly not, it's not a simple, easy, quick fix, but that will change the trajectory to the right area.
Thank you for that, James. And I got a follow-up question actually for you right now with that. As you talk about that partnership and that program that you have with Habitat, what would it take or what would it look like to create that same type of partnership here in Austin with some of the organizations like Oak Park Regional Housing or Westside Health Authority or some of the other organizations that are here that are doing housing work?
Yeah, great question. So, with the Habitat piece, we simply listened. We did a listening tour and got a better understanding of their process. We went back and came back to them with a proposal on how we can help them serve more Habitat families. Their objective is to go out and serve more deserving families. Under Habitat is, every person deserves a decent place to call home. Mm-hmm. So it would be a similar approach. I've worked with Athena for a number of years, and we would talk through it and put things together that make sense, and then internally we would work to figure out a viable financing solution for that particular situation.
Y'all make that happen.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Heard it here first.
So talking more towards the future, so that's a policy, that's addressing policy. Currently, Woodline has a Woodline housing ordinance that Oak Park Regional Housing Center is trying to work with a couple of the West Side aldermen to establish that on the West Side as well. So to address breaking systems, moving things forward, but again, it all starts with organizing the people, educating the people so that they are aware of what their options are and how to actually ascertain and access all the things that's available to them. And another thing that's important for Black wealth is, and I understand that, we've missed out for so many years, but in some of these processes, we have to have some patience. We got to have a little patience.
That's true. And we do need to have patience, and it's always hard to be patient because we've been being patient for too damn long.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right. Understood.
So that's also a challenge. And I know you get that, Athena, because me and you done talked many times. And so I want to shift a little bit because we only have a few more minutes, right? And I want to shift to more of the commercial mixed-use development space, right? Like we have Laramie State Bank, right, for example, and other developments. And I want to hear from you guys. What place can that new development have in bringing about Black wealth in the community, bringing and reimagining what the community even looks like right now, right? Because sometimes I drive down the streets and I get sad. If you drive from downtown, you take Madison from downtown or from the West Loop all the way through and you see the changes in the communities and how certain ones have certain amenities and certain resources and access to certain things. And I think Samantha just said earlier, she has to go 20 minutes just to go anywhere. Folks in Austin, I don't know if you all know this, folks in Austin spend 80% of their disposable income in Oak Park because it ain't here, right? So as developers from that space, how can we shift that narrative? Because no economy can last if the dollar isn't recirculating here, if it's going into a whole another city.
So jump starting with the Laramie State Bank project, and we're actually doing a similar project in Oak Park, and then we're also doing something similar a little further west. The goal is when you have workforce renters is, again, to educate them and let them know about their access to home ownership. And, you know, you're probably going to get tired of hearing me say educate, 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 but it has to start with the education. And when I say be patient, you know, that goes back to a lot of predatory lending that's out there. A lot of people say, well, I can, you know, you can afford to buy a home. There are a lot of groups just putting people in homes without teaching them the sustainability about the financial sustainability about being in that home. So those are some of the things that we have to look out for. But when it comes to those mixed-use projects, you want to make sure that the residents, first of all, those who need the space, and then second of all, give them an option to learn about home ownership. And then even if they decide they want to be renters, because we teach those classes, right? We teach renting versus buying, but then we have people that say, I don't want the responsibility of a home. But then we show them, as Samantha said in the last panel, you just spent $100,000, you just gave $100,000 away because you can't even get that back on your taxes. You gave $100,000 away. That's a big, you know, number for people to realize why they should look into home ownership.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I could add from a slightly different perspective in the sense that a lot of our mixed-use developments are structured around programming, and programming in the sense of how can we partner the community with the development team, with the businesses, and figure out how to generate that wealth and create those communities that have that livable walking distance, resources that you would like to have that you see on the north side, and you don't want to go 20 minutes to go get groceries and things like that. So a lot of ours are around programs of, okay, major national brand, you want to be here, but we also don't want you to hire a bunch of people outside of our community and for us not to have the wealth. So a lot of that is we in our contracts with them, we make them commit something. You're committing something back into the community. You're committing your hiring practices. You're committing a lot of things into training and development and that education that she was talking about, so that and we also commit them to paying higher rent so that we can have lower rents for some of the neighborhood or mom and pop shops or whatever to come in and experience that same new development that costs a lot more per square foot for them to access. So we take it from those perspectives.
Go ahead, Amber.
So just adding on to the future that I want to see for my children who aren't here yet. So that's what I'm working to do, is create that future now. Part of the education piece is so important, but what I want us to challenge us to think about, and the organizing. Like we cannot, with that same, like James pointed that out, you have to have the organizing, you have to have the education, but as an educator, I want us to think about the fact that you learn best while doing. So being patient is very important, but that education piece right now, I'm running a home buyer education course for people who have been excluded, who don't know. But we're actively in this space, like this is about to be something that's happening. In real time, I'm gonna give you full information. So we can't educate and at the same time be changing these systems. So I changed this financial system for you, educate you fully while I'm doing it to recoup, because it does matter that we are so far removed from slavery and we're still not where we should be. So there's a point, like, yes, we do have to be patient, we do, but relatively so. And we do have to expedite some of these things and think about how we're gonna educate while we are changing these systems, while we are getting these home loans, because the people coming through my class, I can say right now, they know it backwards and forwards. They're being properly educated, but they're not gonna have to wait on it. We're gonna make this as real as soon as possible, and we're gonna figure out how to get the equity into your home on the west side, where homes are already undervalued, but this cost is so, I just wanted to challenge, like, education is important, but let education be something that we're actively doing while we're engaging in the process of making change, because we do have to recoup. We do not have the same time. We do not have the same time.
So let me just clarify real quick. So Oak Park Regional Housing Center is a HUD-approved agency. And so with that, we do educate and we do work towards systems. but we also make sure that we look at all of our partners and make sure that people are fully sustainably educated. When I say be patient, and I think I said this when I made that statement, there are a lot of people that are just jumping into lending, jumping into loans. One of the things that we also do, we're a predatory lending counseling agency, because when people go to certain lenders, there's a red flag in the system that says this is a predatory lender, you have to go get extra counseling. So I'm just saying people have to make sure that they're aware of what they're jumping into before they jump into it. Part of our education process is we don't just pair you with any lender. We sit down, we counsel to see what the person's financial analysis is and see which lender they work with best. Then we give them 3 options. So, just clarifying.
Thank you, guys. Look, just like the other panel, we could keep this conversation going. I think it was Tonika that said we should just have everybody out here together and just have one big conversation. And one of the reasons why it can go so long is because it's such a layered conversation, right? And it's such a layered issue. It's not a black or white, no pun intended. But there is so much gray area, right? So we could really dig in. But I want to give everybody 30 seconds if you have any final thoughts. I'm looking at somebody. I ain't going to say no names. If you got any final thoughts before we wrap this panel.
Go ahead.
Again, I'm just going to always stand by education, organizing, and being patient with the process.
I'll just say, from a lender perspective, something that Athena said, just be aware of who you're working with. Take the time, investigate, talk to individuals. We want to be not just in the community, but of the community. And that comes all the way from our parent organization of Wintrust Financial to our community banks, which are in the neighborhoods, and to our mortgage operation, which also work right within the neighborhood. So we just want everybody to get the best viable financing solutions for their particular situations.
And more so from a resident perspective, as well as the artist who looks at analyzing and being a conduit to help deliver this kind of analysis to the larger public. Don't minimize your personal struggles and stories, because they are important to understanding these large systemic issues. So if you are running into barriers, if you are running into questions about your neighborhood, it's all connected to a larger system, and we should continue to do ourselves justice by pursuing answers to all of those questions. So just to not minimize our struggle and the ways in which we have constantly been resilient. So as we try to change these systems, definitely remember to pat ourselves collectively on the back for surviving and thriving in the midst of all of this. So just wanted to offer a little hope, as well as accolades for individuals continuing to do this work, as well as struggling personally through all of these systems, because every expert here on this panel, their personal story still matters. They've all had to be a renter or look for housing. So these are all things that we must remember as we try to change these larger systems, our own personal stories and the stories of our community.
Thankful to be here, and I'm looking forward to the bright future for Black folks everywhere.
And from the developer perspective, I would say we just have to figure out more ways to be in the driver's seat and be making the decisions, choosing what we develop, where we develop, when we're doing it, and bringing up people like us while we're doing that, because a lot of times we're fighting each other instead of working together to make that impact, and there's only a handful of minorities doing development, a handful of women doing the development. So I would say let's start moving more into the driver's seat of where we're going instead of watching others do it around us, and let's do it all together.
All right. With that, I thank you all. Thank you. think I am passing it back to Rashida now.
So was it Tanika who said that the whole panel should have been here the whole time? And again, like, this conversation could have gone on much longer, and probably gone much deeper, as many of the folks on the panel are working in such close proximity to one another, and sharing in some really important work together. There's always this desire to talk about the landscape at a 30,000-foot level, like what is happening with housing across our neighborhood and communities, but you also feel this urge to connect the people so that they can get down into the practical application aspects of the work. And I just was in the back thinking to myself, how frequently do we get to carve out the time for this group of people to be together at once? That could take months in some instances, to convene these folks who sometimes are working, many times are working on the same issues together. This has been such a remarkable day. And I know that there are so many people who have been key and critical and instrumental in the coming together of all of this. Some of whom will not appreciate me calling them up and out, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's how I roll. So I know that Ed is here in the room. He's one of the people who will not like that I am calling it up and out. He's already, if you can't see this on the live stream, he's going, no. But this is our second symposium, and Ed Siderowicz has been incredible in being the wind at our backs. He is, in my estimation, a model example of what servant leadership looks like and what allyship looks like. And my work every day is in diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism spaces. So I do a lot of teaching and training about allyship. And one of the things that I name that's a key element of allyship is that it cannot be self-imposed, that a person who is supposed to be an ally to a work or a people cannot stand up and decide that they are an ally, but that there has to be an invitation that's extended from a community to a person. And I have had the joy of witnessing Ed's work for about a year now, and I am going to say that Ed is an ally. So thank you so much for your work. I know that Cord is somewhere running around in the back, herding all of the cats who are associated with this symposium. It is no easy feat, as we are all visionary leaders, and you know that with visionary leaders, we can sometimes go our own way. And so I don't know where Cord is right now, but I do want to thank him for impeccable production in a season that does not lend itself well to production or productivity for that matter. So I just wanted to thank Court for the work that he has done behind the scenes and the work that he's done even today in ensuring that everything came off without a hitch. And then Vanessa, if you can hear me, okay, let's have Vanessa come to the front here. Can you bring one of those mics with you too, please? And I'm gonna pull mine down. Vanessa Stokes, friends, I'm gonna move because this is the one you wanna see. I'm gonna get out the way so you can see this incredible human.
Thank you.
Vanessa has been instrumental, tantamount, I would say, critical in the coming together of this symposium now for the second time during a pandemic. This would be hard to pull off on a random Tuesday.
Yeah. I agree with that, Rashida.
And so I want to honor you, my sister.
Thank you.
You are my sister.
Yes.
We both gonna cry now?
Yeah. There are a bunch of moments today where I wanted to cry.
Yeah.
This is very powerful.
What were some of those moments? Can you share any of them?
Yeah, just the authenticity that everyone has and sharing really what the impact of housing has had on them. And being a black person and living in Chicago, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
And then the Amber's dedication to Jack McNamara. So I had the privilege of meeting him and many times because he was on the board at Austin Coming Together.
Okay.
And he was just amazing, fiery old white man. And I loved it. I had a crush on him, like a old man crush.
Yeah.
Because he was so amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I just would sit there like, just on every
In awe.
word, like every word he said. He was just so cool. So it just made me really think back to those times when I was with him. So
Yeah.
it was very moving what Amber said.
Yeah, I said myself, I'm like, I missed out, clearly. I never got to meet
Oh, he was
Jack.
great, yeah.
But just to hear you all talk about his life is to know I missed an incredible human on my journey.
Yeah,
for
he was
sure.
amazing.
Yeah. You are no less that, friend. You see how she tried to shift it to Jack, right? We are here to celebrate. That was cute. I saw what you did there. We are still going to celebrate you in this moment and thank you for the symposium, but for every single thing you do that nobody knows.
Yeah.
For every single thing that gets produced in our community that we come to and leave wondering, I wonder who was behind. I'm not wondering, I know. But people leave saying, I wonder who was behind the scenes on all of that. That was so amazing.
Yeah.
And you never take up more room.
It's about us.
Yeah.
It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's about all of us. So I'm here to put people on. That's all I'm here to do. I'm here to leverage what I've created for the other people in the community and the city and pretty much the planet, right?
Sure.
Because it really is about us working together. And that only happens when we leverage who we are to connect the pieces. So that I'm good at that. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'm good at bringing people to the table. I love talking to people. This is, I love it. And that's all I do pretty much is talk to people all day long. And I wouldn't want it any other way than that.
Well, I'm going to say this because I've watched you talk to people, and I can't stand here and have you, like, we can't minimize how. We all talk. I run my mouth for a living, right? And with you, Vanessa, it's not what you say. You talk to people, it's the how. I've watched you in spaces over the years that were hairy in the community, and the eloquence and the ease and the poise and the peace that you bring into that space, it demands and requires that we inhabit that space differently. And that is a different kind of housing.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. Well, I want people to be at peace when they're with each other. Because how are we going to get anything done if we're not at peace, right?
Yeah.
And it does require us to, to look at life differently, And I think for a lot of people, we don't have that space to look at things differently because we're caught up in whatever we're caught up in,
Sure.
right? So really, for me, it's very important that people are peaceful. Like they can let go of whatever is there for them, and we can actually be together, right? So, I mean, I thank you so much for seeing that in me, because it does require something. It does take something to be like that, because I deal with life like everybody else, right? So it does require me to put it aside so I can really be with people. So it does take something to be that way, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I love my community.
Yes, you
I
do.
love being here. I love Chicago. I've lived here my whole life. I'm not from the West Side, but when I came here, I knew it was my home. Just how everybody was here. It was my neighbor. I always tell the story because it's so great. My neighbor, I just separated from my husband and I moved home. I moved with my mom. My dad had just passed away. And I was sleeping on the couch. Like, that's how it was.
It was
at the
real.
time. So, I'm looking and do stuff in the community. I'm just kind of looking around and, I'm just going through this really serious life change. And my neighbor across the street, she just came over and she's like, hey, what are you doing? Now, I don't know. I don't even really know her.
Sure.
But she knew that I had just moved home.
Yeah.
And she was like, what are you doing tonight? I'm like, oh, nothing. She's like, let's go out. And she knew I needed to get out because I had been in the house and, just going through divorce and all the rest of it. It's huge. And a group of us went out and just ladies from the block. And it was like I felt at home. I'd never had that before. And I said, wow, this is what that feels like.
Home.
This is what that feels. This is what community feels like.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, ever since then, I just met so many wonderful people of which you saw on stage.
Sure.
Rosie Dawson, she's amazing. I work with her at Westside Health Authority, and she's so real. Like, when I met her, I was like, man, I just want to be with that lady all the time. How can I do that?
Yeah.
And it just so happened that we're now working together. And Samantha Fury.
Fury.
I mean, she's a resident and just so fiery spirited. And I'm just like, okay, we're gonna get you on stage. Okay. Tonika and Amber and all these people that I met over the years, I think I just want to put them on a platform.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, friend, because I get to witness, right? I get to watch you be you. I get to watch you work. I get to follow you, and I do, and I so do. And it is a remarkable joy for me. I thank you for the work that you do on behalf of our community. I know the tirelessness of it all. I know the story of the behind the scenes, and you make it look easy.
Well, it's not work. It's not. This is fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I love being with people. I can be with people, in my community. Come on. It's not work.
Because that's the relationships. You get to have those relationships.
Yeah.
I get to do my work with the people I love every day.
I mean,
Not
come
everybody
on.
can even say that.
Yeah. I even work with my sister. Literally, who works with family like that? It's amazing to be able to be afforded this privilege, and it is a privilege. So, I'm honored. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much,
Oh, my
Rashida.
gosh.
We've been friends. That one time we walked into we walked in the elevator together at the leadership lab.
And it was a wrap.
And it was over. We were friends up until that time.
Yeah.
So, I'm just happy to be here, happy to be a part of KCA, and thank you so much, Wintrust, for everything that you support with this facility, with this symposium. I mean, this has been a wonderful adventure, and be on the lookout for the next episode.
Yeah.
We got the next one coming up.
Any beans you can spill on that?
Well, I'll just share a little bit. So the multitude of things that I do in the community, I think one thing that has happened out of the pandemic that's been highlighted is health, wellness, and food insecurity. Those three things go hand in hand, right? So I'm looking at it at that maybe being the next installment, or business development, economic development. That's the sphere in which I work in. So I was thinking maybe, either one of those. We'll probably be doing both, but
Yeah.
which one's first? I
Sure.
think food and nutrition and health and wellness is paramount.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, you know, if we don't have our health, we don't have wealth. Because our health is our wealth,
It
right?
is.
And if we don't have that, then we don't have a community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think focusing on food and the fact that we don't have any viable grocery stores, or maybe one or two in Austin, you know, I mean, I think it's huge. And then you look at the disparities with health and all of those things that are happening, especially with COVID. I think, you know, that's something that we need to highlight and talk about.
All right. Well, I'm here in whatever way I can be useful. I know that the community is grateful for what you offer us and what you gift us with every time we have the symposium. And I'm going to let you have the last word, friend. This is...
Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Hold
What's
on.
happening? What's happening?
Don't act like y'all don't know what time it is.
Well, here's the thing.
Don't act like this ain't how we do it every year. Somebody got something for y'all.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Bring it.
Surprise, surprise.
I love the delivery person too. Like
Yeah.
you can't
You haven't
underestimate
seen
the
Sharon
power
all day
of the
out here
delivery
on the
person.
stage.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
Thank
Miss
you so
Sharon.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Oh. Wow. Thank you, Miss Sharon.
Thank you.
You know, putting a bright light on us.
Wow.
And this does kind of touch me. It's very touching. I'm not a very emotional person, but I'm going to be emotional right
Yeah, go ahead, sis.
It's taken me a long time to get here. And it's beautiful.
It really is.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and that concludes the symposium for this time. And until next time, have a good one.